Through the chair, Member Hoffman, there's quite a bit of research on Arctic hares in Canada and Greenland. To my knowledge, there's no recorded evidence of declines. Arctic hares in that region can be found in groups of 100 to 200 individuals currently, and they undergo annual migrations from summering grounds to wintering grounds.
Any other questions from board members? If not, Chris, thanks a whole bunch for that presentation. We look forward to talking to you again a little later on when we get into the proposals. And we'll move on to the subsistence overview.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, members of the public. For the record, my name is Lucille. I'm the Southern Region Program Manager for the Division of Subsistence at ADFG. With me today is Jackie Keating, who is the lead researcher for the South Central region. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Slides associated with this presentation can be found in RC4, tab 1.4. Our presentation this morning is a broad overview of both the Division of Subsistence as well as of subsistence hunting and use of large game in communities throughout Region 4. To begin with, we will provide an overview of the Division of Subsistence, including who we are and the types of work that we do in the department. We'll follow this with a broad level look at subsistence and subsistence regulations in the southwest region of the state and a discussion about recent research in the area. Jackie will then give a similar look at the central region of the state, along with a recap of recent research in that area. So our division is mandated by state statute to conduct studies to gather information from residents of Alaska communities on all aspects of the role of subsistence hunting and fishing in the lives of state residents. The information we collect is to be made available to the public, agencies, and others. As a research division, subsistence staff engage in all research and regulatory arenas in all regions of the state, and we serve both the Board of Game and the Board of Fisheries. This means that staff work to become knowledgeable about subsistence practices concerning both fish and game species, as well as about how both fish and wildlife populations are managed and the regulations concerning all resources. The research we conduct in communities usually concerns both fish and wildlife resources. We make the summarized data that we gather publicly available shortly after the conclusion of projects, and these data are used by the boards, by the department, and by the communities for a variety of applications, including community planning, regulatory changes, and C&T and A&S findings. For members of the public or anyone in the audience who may be unfamiliar with these two terms, I want to take a minute here to define them. C&T refers to customary and traditional uses of resources, which means the non-commercial, long-term, and consistent taking of, use of, and reliance upon fish or game in a specific area. A&S is short for amounts reasonably necessary for subsistence. It is not a harvest quota, but it does provide the board with guidelines on typical numbers of animals harvested for customary and traditional uses under normal conditions. There are several ways that we gather information about the customary and traditional uses of resources. Our research focus and methods are determined by the identified information need or data gap, funding availability, and community input. Most of our projects are partnerships. We work with community entities, regional nonprofits, and other agencies. I can't emphasize enough how important these partnerships are. We couldn't do what we do without their support and participation, most especially of the communities where we work. In general, our research takes place in the more rural areas of the state, but Alaskans living anywhere in the state are eligible to hunt and fish under subsistence regulations. Information on the subsistence harvest of all state residents living in rural and urban areas is available through various permit programs and surveys, and the Division of Wildlife Conservation will be discussing some of those data today. Our work is guided by the Alaska Confidentiality Statute, the National Science Foundation's Principles for the Conduct of Research in the Arctic, and the Alaska Federation of Natives Guidelines for Research. All of our research projects are based on voluntary participation, informed consent, confidentiality, and respect for the privacy and dignity of the people we work with and learn from. Toward this end, we utilize procedures to preserve the anonymity of subjects in our records so that information cannot be tied to identifiable persons. Informed consent is obtained from each participant in the research, as well as from the community at large. At the end of projects, we return to communities with draft data for their review and feedback. Comprehensive surveys are one of our standard data gathering methods, and today we'll be presenting some of the information that results from these tools. As their name implies, the surveys are comprehensive. Through them, we collect information on every type of wild food a household might harvest and gather details such as the methods of harvesting and processing, amounts harvested, the areas used for harvesting, and the prevalence of sharing among households. Our goal is to gain a holistic understanding of subsistence ways of life in these communities. Most of the places we work have a mixed cash subsistence economy, meaning wages from jobs and other income are used to augment and support subsistence activities. So we also document demographic details of the household, income and employment specifics, as well as food security information. For all of our projects, we conduct these surveys face-to-face, usually in people's homes. In smaller communities, we'll attempt to survey every permanent household, but in larger communities, we conduct a random sample. These surveys are completely voluntary, and the data collected are stored and reported anonymously. We present data at the community level, not the individual household level. Ethnography is another of our standard data collection methods. Broadly speaking, ethnographic fieldwork is the way that we attempt to understand other people's ways of knowing. We use several established social science methods of ethnographic fieldwork and data analysis. Semi-structured interviews are conducted with knowledgeable, active, or former subsistence harvesters, processors, or community members. The interviews follow a thematic protocol, but can accommodate variability in the experiences and expertise of the respondents. Participant observation provides a chance for researchers to participate in and observe different harvesting or processing activities, providing us with experiential knowledge. Life history mapping is an opportunity to speak with long-term community members, and through the use of maps, document and discuss changes in habitat, resource populations, social structures. Each of these approaches require rigorous, well-thought-out methods accompanied by data analysis in order to provide meaningful and useful information. So I wanted to make sure that the board and the public are aware that all this information and data that we collect are available through our online Community Subsistence Information System, the CSIS, and our technical paper series. The CSIS is a data portal that provides access to all the community-level harvest and use data that's been collected over the past 40 years, along with summaries of demographics, economics, and research methods for each community and project. The technical paper series houses all of our published reports, where we analyze and discuss survey and ethnographic research results. So before we dive into the Central and Southwest regions, I wanted to provide a little information about the people who work in our division. As I mentioned earlier, our staff are responsible for research and regulatory work concerning both fish and wildlife throughout the state. Despite the large geographic scale in which we work, we are a small group. We're broadly divided into the northern region and the southern region, with the Alaska Range being the major geographic boundary. The southern region itself is split between southwest, south central, and southeast, and we have a small staff that specialize in each of these regions. The geographic region of focus of this meeting encompasses our southwest region, where we have Maddie Christensen currently as our sole regional staff member. We have a vacant position for our lead researcher there. It also covers portions of our South Central region, where we have two regional staff, Jackie Keating and Christian Woodard. In each of these regions, staff are assisted by Subsistence Resource Specialist 1s who work throughout the southern region, and short-term fish and wildlife techs hired during our field season. So I want to briefly share a bird's eye view of Region 4. The area encompassed by the region and the focus of this meeting contains 95 communities, 73% of which are found outside the Anchorage-Kenai-Matsu non-subsistence area, which we'll discuss in more detail during Jackie's presentation. These rural communities comprise multiple cultural and traditional use patterns. The southwest region is divided into Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and the Aleutian Islands, and the central region includes Upper Cook Inlet and Copper River. So the next portion of the presentation will be focused just on the southwest region, which is outlined here in black. So the southwest region encompasses Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and the Aleutian Islands, each of which roughly correspond to game management units. Bristol Bay includes the entirety of Unit 17 and its 10 communities, as well as most of the 25 communities of Unit 9. The 4 communities of Unit 9D and 5 communities of Unit 9E that are situated along the Gulf of Alaska are more aptly considered a part of the Alaska Peninsula or Aleutian Island region, along with the 8 communities of Unit 10. So this figure shows the estimated percentages of households using and harvesting land mammals, both large game such as moose or small game like ptarmigan and hare. The teal bars are the percentage of households using land mammals, and the orange bars are their percentage harvesting. The data shown are collected through our household harvest surveys in communities located within each unit and aggregated to a unit-wide level. This figure is showing the average of the most recent study year for all the communities within each unit. You can see the use of land mammals is very high in Bristol Bay communities, where nearly 90% of households in Unit 17 use land mammals, and approximately 2/3 of households use them in Unit 9. Use levels drop pretty dramatically for Unit 10 communities, reasons for which we'll cover in the next slides. For each unit, however, you can see that the percentage of households using land mammals is much greater than the percentage of households harvesting these resources. We usually see these kinds of differences between using and harvesting resources because of the role sharing plays in rural Alaska communities, especially for resources such as moose and caribou. So comprehensive subsistence household harvest surveys allow us to document the harvest and use of all types of resources that are used in Alaska communities. This figure shows the average composition of harvest and per capita pounds harvested for each of the 3 units in the Southwest region. Per capita harvests control for changes in population and allow us to better assess trends in harvest and use over time. As you can see, per capita harvests are generally higher in Units 17 and 9 than they are in the Aleutian Island communities of Unit 10. In each unit, fish, salmon here represented by blue and non-salmon fish in light blue, compose the majority of the pounds harvested. Second in importance, however, are mammals, with large land mammals, shown here in the yellow color, composing 22% of the harvest in Unit 17 and 15% of the harvest in Unit 9. In Unit 10, the relative scarcity of large land mammals is reflected in their small contribution to the overall harvest, but the more accessible marine mammals are harvested in quantity. So Bristol Bay is the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina, Athabascan, and Central Yupik peoples. Bristol Bay residents have hunted large land mammals, particularly caribou, for thousands of years. As we saw a few slides ago, people in this region harvest a diversity of resources, but the primary reliance is upon salmon and large land mammals, particularly caribou and moose. Black bear are only found in portions of Bristol Bay, but where it's available for harvest, it is valued as a meat source. Brown bear was used more frequently in the past than in the present, especially during times when other resources were not available. In the region, there are high numbers of hunters and users of caribou and moose. Hunting for large game occurs from the fall through the spring, with the preferred season depending on the species and the desired use. In the fall, caribou are fat, and many households have a dwindling supply of caribou and moose meat, but hunters traditionally also relied on the winter hunt for caribou. Winter environments have historically provided easier hunt conditions for caribou, but it is dependent on sufficient snow and ice, which has been more volatile in recent years. Moose is a relative newcomer to Bristol Bay, and there is a regional preference for caribou. But as caribou become scarcer, people rely more and more upon moose. Hunters tend to harvest moose during the fall hunt. Bears are taken during the fall for their fat and for hides, especially brown bear, and sometimes for meat, whereas spring hunts are more likely undertaken just for the meat of either species. Hunters generally use skiffs during the fall and snow machines during the winter to access hunting grounds. Contemporary preservation methods include freezing and canning, along with eating fresh. Drying was a common practice in the past, but is less so now. As we discussed earlier, sharing of resources in these communities is very important. Not only is the meat shared amongst hunting party members and the community, but the labor and equipment necessary for successful harvests are also shared. Hunting groups tend to be primarily composed of close relatives, and when traveling to different communities to hunt, people rely on kin ties in those communities to gain access. The act of harvesting and sharing moose and caribou reinforce these kinship ties and values of family, community, and respect for elders. So moving to the Alaska Peninsula Aleutian Islands region, these are the traditional territories of the Alutiiq-Sugpiaq and Nunangan people. In comparison to Bristol Bay, subsistence in this region is more oriented towards the sea. Salmon and marine mammals are important components of subsistence harvest here, as land mammals are not as abundant. For communities on or near the Alaska Peninsula, there's access to caribou through the Unimak Island herd and the Southern Alaska Peninsula herd, as well as to brown bears. Archaeological evidence suggests caribou have been hunted in the area for thousands of years. Moose were not present on the Alaska Peninsula until the mid-1900s, and there wasn't a harvestable surplus of them until the late 1990s. Households still receive moose and caribou through sharing networks, even if they are not engaged in hunting them. Brown bear has been an important resource for communities on the peninsula and still are harvested. Similar to Bristol Bay, fall, especially September, and spring are key times for harvesting land mammals, and access to hunting areas is through commercial boats, skiffs, and ATVs. Hunters here prefer multiple short hunting trips throughout the year, lasting for a couple of days, rather than one longer trip in which all the caribou needed for a year are harvested. And here, kinship ties are also important, with groups of related hunters often harvesting together. The younger generations are trained during these hunts. Skilled hunters take the majority of caribou and share widely, first along kinship lines and then along friendship lines. In the Southwest region, there are 6 identified caribou herds, and 5 of them have a positive customary and traditional use finding. Only the ADAC herd has a negative finding. The board made C&T findings for the Unimak Island herd and the Nushagak Peninsula herd at your last meeting in 2022. No ANS determinations were made at that meeting. For the Nushagak herd, local ACs had expressed a desire for more time to collect information for the board to determine an appropriate ANS, and for the Unimak herd, there was a lack of data for an ANS as hunting on the herd had been closed. This map depicts caribou hunting areas used by residents of Units 9, 10, and 17 as documented through household harvest surveys since the 1980s. The map only shows spatial extent, not hunting intensity of any area. And in this area, there's a mixture of registration hunts and general season hunts, along with a Tier 2 hunt on the northern Alaska Peninsula. There are 3 separate findings for moose in this area. There's a positive C&T finding for Unit 9, except for Unit 9D, which has a negative finding, and there's a positive finding for moose in Unit 17. The ANS is set at a range of 100 to 140 moose in Unit 9 and 100 to 150 moose in Unit 17. Similar to the previous map slide, this map is showing the extent of area used for moose hunting by residents of Units 9, 10, and 17, as documented through household harvest surveys. Moose hunting opportunities are a mixture of registration and general season hunts. There's a drawing hunt for non-residents in Unit 17 and no moose hunts in Unit 10, as there are no moose in that unit. There are separate C&T findings for black bear and brown bear. For black bear, there's a negative finding in Unit 17 and no finding in Unit 9. For brown bear, there are positive findings in Unit 17, as well as Units 9B and 9E. The board has made negative findings for brown bear in Units 9A, 9C, 9D, and Unit 10. This map represents all the black and brown bear hunting areas used by residents of Units 9, 10, and 17, as documented through household harvest surveys. Black bear hunting areas are shown in gold or yellow, and brown bear areas are in the pink hashed areas. For both black bear and brown bear, hunting opportunities are through a combination of registration and general season hunts. In Unit 10, there's a drawing hunt for brown bear and no black bear hunts. These next 2 slides contain the remainder of the C&T findings and ANS determinations for game in Units 9, 10, and 17. The one species I want to highlight on this table is sheep. The board has not made any C&T findings for sheep in Unit 9 or 17. There are also no proposals before the board this cycle concerning sheep in either of these units. And these are the C&T findings for birds, Alaska hare, and snowshoe hare. You can see that each of these is currently lacking an ANS finding. So before we move on to the Central Region overview, I wanted to briefly share some of the recent and upcoming work of the division in Southwest Alaska. We recently completed several comprehensive household harvest surveys. These surveys are conducted in late winter or early spring and are a retrospective look at the previous year. In each of these recent surveys, the study year was the previous calendar year. So we have updated data for Port Ellsworth and Non-Dalton for study year 2021, for Kakanaak and Igiagig for study year 2022, and for Manicodic, False Pass, and Nelson Lagoon for study year 2023. Data from all these surveys will be published by the next time the board meets in this region. Looking forward, we're going to be completing comprehensive household surveys in Chignik, Chignik Lake, Chignik Lagoon, and Perryville. This coming spring, that will be covering study year 2024, and we propose research in the communities of New Halen, Iliamna, and Pedro Bay. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Jackie.
Good morning. Again, for the record, my name is Jackie Keating. I'm the lead South Central Subsistence Resource Specialist for the department. And the rest of our presentation will be an overview of the central portion of Region 4. This encompasses Units 11, 13, 14A and 14B, and Unit 16. Some subunits in the central region fall within the Anchorage-Matsu-Kenai non-subsistence area, or the NSA. These are Units 14A, 14B, and 16A. As board members may recall from the joint board meeting last March, NSAs are areas where dependence upon subsistence is not a principal characteristic of the economy, culture, and way of life as determined by the Joint Board of Fisheries and Game. Therefore, there is no subsistence priority in NSAs, and subsistence hunts cannot be authorized within NSAs. However, it's important to note that all Alaska residents are eligible to participate in subsistence hunts outside of NSAs, regardless of where they live in the state. It should also be noted that in times of conservation concerns, participation in subsistence hunts can be limited, like what we see in Unit 13 for Nelchina caribou. Our subsistence overview will focus on regulatory information and data we collect in the management units outside of the non-subsistence area. But I'd like to note that you'll be hearing more from the Division of Wildlife Conservation about the types of information that the department collects on subsistence uses by all Alaskan residents in the central portion of Region 4. The Central Region GMUs outside of the Anchorage-Matsu-Kenai NSA are Units 11, 13, and 16B. While outside of the non-subsistence area, these units are close to some of Alaska's largest population centers and therefore are heavily utilized by residents living inside of the NSA. Units 11 and 13 are accessible by road. Unit 11 encompasses a portion of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and contains the communities of Slana and McCarthy. Neighboring Unit 13 is home to 20 communities ranging from 12 residents to over 400, or about 2,600 people total. Many communities in Unit 13 are located near the border of Unit 11, and residents utilize lands and waters in both units to meet subsistence needs. Therefore, summary information on harvest, use, and spatial data for residents of these areas will be presented together as Units 11-13 combined. On the western side of Cook Inlet, Unit 16B is home to the communities of Tyonek, Beluga, and Alexander-Susitna and Squentna, totaling less than 300 residents. While not road accessible, Anchorage and Matsu residents can easily access Unit 16B by plane, motorboat, or snow machine. Like the figures you saw for the Southwest region, this figure shows the estimated percentages of households from Units 11, 13, and 16B that used and harvested land mammals during the most recent study year in each community. Community level data are aggregated to a unit-wide level. As you can see from the blue bars, land mammals are important to residents of the central region, with about 80% of households using large land mammals in both Units 11-13 and Unit 16B. Also, like the previous harvest and use figures, a smaller percentage of households harvested land mammals, with 40% of Unit 11-13 households harvesting and 29% of Unit 16B harvesting. This again reflects the prevalence of sharing wild foods in these communities. And this figure shows the average composition of harvest in pounds per capita for Units 11-13 and Unit 16B. As you heard previously, per capita harvest control for changes in population and allow us to better assess trends in harvest and use over time. As you can see, average per capita harvest for the Central Region households is 147 usable pounds for Units 11-13 and 173 pounds in Unit 16B. For both groupings, salmon and dark blue compose the majority of the harvest weight, followed by large land mammals in the darker shade of yellow. For the most recent study years, residents of Units 11-13 harvested 48 pounds of large land mammals per person, and residents of Unit 16B harvested 42 pounds per person. Units 11 and 13 include the Copper River Basin, where Athena Athabascan people have lived for over 1,000 years. Salmon, moose, caribou, and freshwater fish were historically harvested and used in large quantities, but birds, small game, and plants were also widely used. Caribou were traditionally taken with snares, spears, and bow and arrow. Contemporarily, some bow harvest occurs, but mostly with rifle on road corridors and established trails. Before firearms, moose were harvested with snares set along a trail or in game fences. Late summer-fall moose hunts were from upland camps or along river corridors. Traditional moose seasons in winter-spring were linked to storage requirements. As other foods ran out over the winter, more moose were taken to meet family needs. Skilled hunters traditionally take several moose or caribou to share throughout the community. Meat preservation methods include drying, smoking, canning, and freezing. Hunting knowledge is primarily passed down through familial relationships, and contemporary hunters living in the Copper Basin still report primarily learning to hunt from their fathers. The board identified communal patterns of use for Unit 13, which was a factor in establishing the community's subsistence hunt in 2009. Today, Alaska residents both within and outside of Units 11 and 13 rely on harvest opportunities in these units. The area encompassed by Unit 16B has been occupied by the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina Athabascans since before recorded history. Dena'ina people historically relied on large quantities of salmon, moose, caribou, and brown and black bear for sustenance throughout the year. The traditional preference for winter moose hunting in the region has also been adopted by contemporary communities in 16B. Winter temperatures create optimal travel conditions after thick summer vegetation thins out, and moose become more accessible in the winter months when they congregate in lowlands. Additionally, winter temperatures are more conducive to meat processing and preservation. As one Squintna hunter shared during the Subsistence household surveys in 2012, we need to be able to store our foods without refrigeration. Winter is when we need to take a moose for that reason. Past and present residents of Tyonek on the northwest shores of Cook Inlet have valued utilizing all parts of harvested animals, including widespread sharing of moose products from meat and internal organs to the nose and tongue. Kinship ties still structure harvest activities, with equipment and effort shared among family and friend groups for both harvesting and processing wild foods. Today, moose in 16B occur in 4 geographically separate populations with different demographic characteristics, as well as different hunting conditions and hunter characteristics. And next, we'll look at subsistence findings for some of the most widely used species in the central portion of Region 4. There are 4 caribou herds in the central region for which the board has made a positive, customary, and traditional use finding. They are the Mentasta herd in Unit 11, the Nelchina herd in Unit 13, and the Big River Rainy Pass herds in Unit 16B, as well as portions of Unit 19. The board set an ANS of 600 to 1,000 caribou in Units 12 and 13, 50 to 70 caribou for the Big River Rainy Pass herds, and has not yet set an ANS for caribou in Unit 11. There's not currently a harvestable surplus of caribou in Unit 13, therefore no subsistence hunts were open for the last 2 seasons. This map depicts caribou hunting areas used by residents of Units 11, 13, and 16B as documented through household harvest surveys conducted over the past 5 decades. Like maps for the Southwest region, this map only shows spatial extent, not hunting intensity. At present, caribou hunting in central units outside the NSA is only open through the general season registration in Unit 16B. Though caribou is currently closed in Units 11 and 13, past hunt opportunities have included Tier 1, Tier 2, community subsistence hunts, and general season harvest tickets. There are positive, customary, and traditional use findings for moose in all central units outside the NSA, with an ANS of 30 to 40 moose in Unit 11, 300 to 600 moose in Unit 13, 10 moose in Unit 16B in the redoubt drainages, 29 to 37 in 16B south of the Beluga River and north of Redoubt Bay, and 160 to 180 moose in 16B north of the Beluga River. Like the previous map, this map depicts moose hunting areas used by residents of Units 11, 13, and 16B as documented through household harvest surveys. Moose hunting occurs under general season regulations in all 3 units. Moose in Unit 11 and 13 can also be hunted through the community subsistence hunt and drawing hunts, while additional registration tags are available in Unit 13. In Unit 16B, Tier 2 hunts allow for moose hunting opportunities outside the general season. And finally, there's a positive, customary, and traditional use finding for Dall sheep in Unit 11, and the board set an ANS of 60 to 75 sheep. The board made negative findings for sheep in Units 13B, C, and D. And this map depicts sheep hunting areas used by residents of Units 11, 13, and 16B over the past 5 decades as documented through household harvest surveys. Sheep hunting occurs under general season regulations in all 3 units, with drawing hunt opportunities available in Unit 13. And the next 2 tables contain the remainder of the C&T findings and ANS determinations for game in the central units outside of the NSA. On this first one, I'd like to highlight that the board made positive C&T findings for black bear in all 3 units and set an ANS of 20 to 50 bears in Unit 11 and 13, and 15 to 40 bears in Unit 16B. Additionally, there are positive C&T findings in Units 11, 13, and 16B for grouse, ptarmigan, migratory game birds, snowshoe hare, and fur bears. The board has not yet set an ANS for these species, with the exception of fur bears, which is 90% of the harvestable portion. And since the last Region 4 board meeting, we've completed comprehensive household harvest surveys in Mentasta Pass, Mentasta Lake, and Chistachina for the 2022 study year, and Slana and Nebezna for the 2023 study year. This project was a partnership with Ahtna Intertribal Resources Commission and the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park, and the final technical paper will be published by December 2025. Because our small South Central team is also responsible for Region 2, I wanted to share that we recently completed comprehensive surveys in Port Lions and New Zinke for the 2022 study year and Port Graham for the 2023 study year. We're also collaborating with the Chugach Regional Resources Commission to conduct a moose traditional ecological knowledge study in Port Graham, and you'll be hearing more about these studies at next year's board meeting in Kodiak. In addition to comprehensive surveys, we work with the native village of Tyonek, located in Unit 16B, to administer and retrieve subsistence fishing permits each spring and fall. And we're currently involved in a food resiliency study with the Kodiak Area Native Association. We've submitted a proposal to conduct comprehensive surveys in Cordova for the 2025 study year and hope to be starting that research soon. And you'll hear from our division again and again that we could not do the work we do without partnerships and the knowledge, trust, and involvement of the residents of the communities we work in. We'd like to thank all the residents who have participated in subsistence research over the years, and thank you to the board for the opportunity to share this information. With that, we're happy to take any questions.
Laura and Jackie, thanks a whole bunch for that presentation. It was great and it's very thorough. Do we have any questions from board members? Member Brett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lauren and Jackie. That was really informational. I'm curious, I didn't see in your presentation how you accounted for documented migrant hunters. Those that hunt, that migrated from into the area, they were, they're from outside the area that you had your counts in.
Sure. So the research that we do within communities, we survey permanent residents of those communities, year-round residents. And so during our harvest surveys, we don't talk to people who are just seasonal residents who just come in and just hunt. And so it is a look at just the community, the use patterns of the community, not necessarily the use patterns of that whole region, because there are people coming from outside the region to hunt in there. And so we may capture them in other household harvest surveys, or data may be captured under permits or harvest tickets or things like that.
All right, thank you.
Vice Chair Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jackie and Lauren, for that presentation. As always, that was really good information. And I just want to make a quick comment. As someone who's been part of these surveys, I've always been impressed about the way your department and you guys conduct this work. It's challenging going into people's homes, and it's a fun survey. It's among not like others. My family and I really enjoy it, and it gave my sons a really good opportunity to tell someone about their hunting stories who they haven't told yet. So just want to thank you for all your work, and I think it's valuable information.
Any other questions from board members? If not, thank you very much for that presentation. It was great.